Hi, Suzanne. It's great to chat to you again. Welcome back, because today we are going to be talking about part two of the Renters Reform Bill. We did part one about a month ago, and we had loads of views on YouTube and loads of interest, and hopefully lots of new people to your website from Alphaletz as well. And it was really well received. We had some great feedback on it. So I'm delighted to welcome you back today for part two.
Thank you.
So I think what we could talk about today is, since we chatted as well, the other interesting thing that came up was Michael Gove said that he's going to outlaw Section 21. So this was new information that came up. And of course, everybody is trying to interpret what that really means.
Yeah, so he was being interviewed by Laura Kunsberg a couple of weeks ago on a Sunday, and he said that Section 21 would be outlawed by
Mm.
the general election,
Mm.
which had a lot of people wondering what on earth he was talking about. I think that there is no way that Section 21 can actually be abolished and that the abolition be implemented by the time the general election. Let's say the general election is November. I think that's what all the commentators take, because at the moment it hasn't even passed through the House of Commons. And when he was being interviewed by Laura Kunsberg, he gave the impression it had gone through the House of Commons.
Yeah.
So it's still got quite a long way to go. And the next step is to go to, well, it's to finish House Commons and then to go to the House of Lords. And then there's a thing called ping pong where it goes backwards and forwards. And then the final step is royal assent. So I think he was referring to royal assent, and it's just about possible if they get their skates on and do the report stage and third reading in March, then it might get on the statute book by the election.
Mm.
But in terms of implementation, which normally happens in 12, 18 months later, or 6, 12, 18 months later, depending, I don't think that landlords will be in the position where they can't serve a Section 21 notice by November. I can't
Yeah,
see that.
I think he chose his words very carefully.
Yes.
Hasn't he?
Oh, he's a politician. I can't see that there's any world in which the Labour Party would bring in a more favourable bit of legislation for landlords than what we have at the moment. So I think most landlords should be hoping that the Renters Reform Bill makes the statute book before the election, because then it might be a big priority for the Labour Party when they go into office. So I think it's the best of all of the not so good scenarios. Although, there is quite a lot of stuff in the Renters Reform Bill that is good for landlords. For instance, the property portal or the PRS database, it's called different things. I think that's a really fantastic idea, and it
Yeah.
will help landlords keep track of all of the documents and upload it, and tenants will easily be able to see if they've got a good landlord. And the rogue landlords who don't have the satisfactory EICRs, and they do exist, I know, because I bought from them,
Mm.
then hopefully they will be prosecuted for it, or
Yeah.
won't be able to let. And it will be illegal for landlords to let a property without an active entry on the property portal, both for their property and for themselves. But
Yeah.
that's what the Renters Reform Bill says at the moment.
Yes. I wonder how that's coming along, because I haven't heard much about it other than there's going to be one.
Well, last year there was some procurement notice I spotted, and it was clear that not much thinking had gone into it, and so who knows, and
Yeah.
this is one of the many things that needs to be sorted out before the Renters Reform Bill can come into force. It's not just this; it's the property ombudsman, the PRS ombudsman, and all of these regulations that need to be put into place for pets, and the decent home standard. We still don't have the detail in
No,
that. So
no,
I
we don't.
think that the Renters Reform Bill is still a long way from being law and implemented,
Yeah,
and changing the way that we have to do things.
I agree. And I'm very pleased to say that within Alpha, a little plug for Alphalet's, we can actually track compliance already. But yeah, no, it's a good point. So I would love to see more stuff about tenants as well, being a landlord, because I know it's great to drive out rogue landlords and make it a more professional business. But for all,
I mean, I'd like to see better enforcement, because the problem
Yeah.
is we have so many rules, and the good landlords like you and me, we comply it down to
Yeah.
the nth
Everything.
degree.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the criminal landlords
Yeah.
are rarely prosecuted.
Yeah.
And I hope that it will make it a lot easier for local authorities to spot criminal landlords with the property portal.
Well, I've got one of my letting agents, and now the agent is charging me a compliance fee as well.
Yeah, I agree, and this is a big tip for landlords. Before you sign up with a letting agent, read the fees, because
Yeah.
somebody might say, oh, it's 10% fees or 8% fees, and then you look at all the extras. And even some of the big letting agents have this compliance fee, which is a monthly fee, and you kind of think, well, why are they charging it? Isn't
Yeah.
isn't that what the actual basic fee is?
Yeah.
And it doesn't take that much checking to see if there's a
Yeah.
gas safety certificate every
Yeah.
year. But I'm going to make a prediction that letting agents will charge for putting documents on the property portal. There'll be
Yeah.
a compliance fee, even though it's not going to be a big deal. Well, at least I don't think so.
Yeah.
They'll presumably be able to have the EPC from the public records anyway, because you can
Yes.
search that. And
Yes. Yes. Because
it,
on the part one that we did on the last chat, we talked about, is this going to cost more for landlords? Is the renters reform bill? And you made some really good points on that as well. And I agree. I think there will be additional costs that nobody's thought of yet. So if you haven't watched part one, anyone out there, please have a look at that. So talking about compliance and legislation, do you have any data on this stuff? Because I know you hear everything from different angles and different people all the time. Any data that you can point us to?
Well, the white paper, A Fairer Private Rented Sector, has some data on this, and they got it from the English Private Landlord Survey. So it is a couple of years out of date, but it is really interesting. So they have categorized or segmented landlords into different groups. The first one, which they estimate to be 30% of the landlord population, are those who demonstrate good practice. So they're more likely to be a member of something, an organization like the NRLA. They're compliant, they're good landlords, that property is a significant part of what they do, they're aware of legislative changes, etc. So they're the model landlords. And the next category, which they think is 24%, so it's about a quarter of landlords, are what's called mixed compliance. So these landlords have some awareness of the regulation that's changing, but they don't necessarily feel that they understand it. Property is seen as rental income and a pension contribution. They might not have carried out all of the relevant document checks, and they might be a bit more hands-off. They might not know all the details of their property, and they're not a member of a landlord association and rely on gov.uk and online media and letting agents for information. So the biggest group, which is 35% of private landlords, are what the government term is meeting legal requirements, and with most legislation, and but less likely to be compliant with good practice indicators, although they don't say what they are. So they're engaged and responsible, making sure that they do all the safety checks, but they're less likely to be a member of a landlord association. They rely on online forums and letting agents for information. And then the final category are the lower compliance and awareness. It's 11% of the landlord population. They don't really know what's going on, and with legislation, they're not likely to be, or least likely to be, compliant with legislation or good practice indicators, and most likely to be concerned with tenant behavior rather than actually looking at their own behavior and what they do as landlords. And they tend not to have complied with legislation, and some of those would be criminal landlords as well. So it is actually interesting that that's how the government sees landlords in these different buckets, which are slightly overlapping, but
Yeah.
that's
You
how they
mentioned
say.
another very interesting stat to me, that only 18% of landlords use an agent. So that means 82% of them do it themselves, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. That was in the English Private Landlord Survey. And whereas slightly more than half of landlords use letting agents to find tenants, when it comes to management, most landlords, the overwhelming majority of landlords actually manage themselves. And that's not the impression that letting agents give. And it's interesting. I was really surprised when I saw that figure. Yeah. And I think that all landlords will need to be professional in their approach. It doesn't mean they're a professional landlord, but at least be professional and organized in their approach. And that's why systems like Alphaletz are really useful because you can set up reminders. But landlords are just going to have to be really organized, and it's going to be the new way of doing things. And so we need to adapt.
And one thing that's I'm hearing a lot about at the moment, and it's gathering a lot of momentum, is rent to rent. So that's something which is I wouldn't say it's necessarily new, but it's certainly a lot of the training courses and so on promote that because it's a great way. If you don't have a lot of cash, you don't have to, you don't have to put down deposits to buy houses. You can build up a portfolio without having to use a lot of money, and therefore it's a good way of getting into the market.
So the thing with rent to rent, it was a big case that went all the way to the Supreme Court last year, called Rackerson, and there was an overseas landlord who used Hamptons as a letting agent, and Hamptons set them up with a company that was going to be providing, or had the ability to run the house as an HMO. So you had a contract between, like a lease agreement between the superior landlord to the middle landlord, and then that middle landlord let it on an HMO basis, but didn't get a license. And it went all the way up to the House of Lords. And because of the word repayment for rent repayment order, the middle landlord was liable for the rent repayment order of up to a year's rent to the tenants. But because of the word repayment, the superior landlord wasn't liable. And the tenant had been trying to get the money off the superior landlord who had more money. So anyway, what's happening in the Renters Reform Bill is is going to give the judge in the first tier tribunal the option of enforcing a rent repayment order against both that middle landlord and the top landlord, and it can make them jointly and severally liable, or make it all for the middle landlord or the top landlord. So it means that landlords, if they enter into a rent-to-rent arrangement, will still be on the hook for the various offences that come under the rent repayment orders.
Yeah.
Also, there are new offences in the Renters Reform Bill, like not doing the property portal properly, not belonging to the Ombudsman as well. And the big thing is that the rent repayment order, instead of being a maximum of 1 year's rent, it's going to be a maximum of 2 years' rent. So short version is, if you enter into a rent-to-rent arrangement, you have to be really sure that they're good and check up on them, because you could be liable to pay up to 2 years rent of the rent that not you receive, but the rent that the tenants paid to the middle landlord, if they don't do the proper licensing, etc.
I wonder if all landlords know whether they've even got it on a rent to rent, because I've been approached, and what the normal approach is, we're a company, we'd like to do a corporate let on your, so that the letting agreement that I would have as a landlord is with a company, but it's not really that the company is the rent to rent company who are then subletting it on again. So do you think, what happens, that's a bit of a gray area as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you let a property to a supported living provider, to a council, to a rent-to-renter, that's not a tenancy agreement, that's a lease. and they are not Housing Act tenants because it's not their primary residence. And it's that middle landlord who then lets the property onto tenants on a rent-to-rent basis, although some of them do holiday lets as well. And I think that anywhere where you are not in a direct contractual relationship with the tenant is effectively a rent-to-rent. It's that model. They're just a corporate let or a hospital or a council. They're the middle landlord, and will be liable, potentially liable for errors they make. That will be at the judge's discretion under Section 78 of the the Renters
Too many
Reform.
sections.
Oh yeah, no, I get it a lot more than that. I've spent way too much time reading it.
Well, talking of which, I know on the last video we talked about the differences between Section 21 and Section 8, because the other part of Renters Reform Bill is that if Section 21 is outlawed, or whatever word, if it goes away, then it will be replaced by Section 8. Can you just clarify for us again the differences, the main differences, and how this might be, the implications for landlords on that?
Sure. So with Section 21, you issue Section 21 notice, and most tenants move out within the 2 months, and you don't need to go to court to evict them. If they don't move out within the 2 months, you can use the accelerated procedure, which is usually online, and it's quick. The judge has no discretion. You don't have to prove anything other than that you've served all the relevant documents. And so that can still take a long time, but most people don't actually end up going to court to get a warrant for possession and call the bailiffs in. Whereas with Section 8, you actually do have to go to court, and you have to, even for the mandatory grounds, there's going to be a new mandatory grounds that the landlord can serve notice if the tenant has been 1 day late pay in at least 2 months rent 3 times in 3 years. So at the moment, a serious rent arrear is 2 months rent, both at the time you serve the notice and at the day of the court hearing. But this will mean that if they've just had it 3 times and then they pay it back down, the landlord can still take them to court to get possession. Anyway, but even for the mandatory grounds, like the new one with a new landlord, a landlord selling up, the landlord will have to prove that this is the case. And for the mandatory grounds, the judge, once the judge has believed that the landlord has proved it, they will then have to grant an order for possession. And then with the discretionary ones, and some of those are like breach of contract and less serious rent arrears, you not only have to prove it, but you have to show that it's reasonable for the person to be evicted, which is a lot harder to do. And that is all through the courts process, and it takes a long time. You've got to pay for lawyers. It's expensive. Landlords probably won't get their costs back because if somebody's in rent arrears and in difficulty, then they probably won't have the money. They'll just be wanting to get possession. So it is likely to be a lot more difficult and a lot more expensive to get possession using Section 8, unless, of course, tenants move out once they get the notice because they don't want the aggravation of going to court. And there will certainly be some tenants who will just move out.
I mean, that's a good point. It's aggro for tenants as well as landlords. Probably why Michael Gove did choose his words very carefully, because he probably knows exactly the situation at the back end of things. And that brings me into your blog, because I signed up recently when we first started chatting a month or so ago, and really enjoy the blog. It comes out every Friday, doesn't it?
The newsletter,
with the newsletter and the latest news. And the information on your site is fantastic. And I said it before, I don't know how you keep churning out so much good information, because there's a lot to know. You're speaking from personal experience because you are a solicitor and a landlord. So you've got the legal side and the hands-on experience of being a landlord. And the content, as I say, it's really, really good.
It's we've now got over 3,000 subscribers, so
Yeah, it's amazing, really, because you
it,
only started it. What was it, a year or so?
18 months ago,
18 months ago, yeah, which is amazing to. And whenever I do a search, your stuff always seems to come up at the top of the
Oh,
page.
excellent.
Which means it's very relevant, content as well, which is fantastic.
I do spend quite a lot of time trying to make it make the content easy to find and with lots of questions and answers and things like that, which because it's readable, Google likes that as well. So I do the whole thing myself, and it does take an inordinate amount of
I
time.
can imagine it does, absolutely. So thank you, Suzanne. We'll get this. You'll probably be seeing it on YouTube for those people watching it today. And as I say, we will continue to bring you out great content in the future. So thanks again, Suzanne. And as I said before, if you haven't subscribed to Suzanne's newsletter, very easy to do, no cost, and you can do that straight away. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you.